Welcome to Monday's edition of COVID-19. We're starting the work week with more than 500 new infections and a worrying rise in the reproduction rate, which now stands at over 1%. Meanwhile, on a positive note, Korea and the US have marked favorable progress on the vaccine front. We begin now with the pandemic updates with our Kwon So-ah. So, just start us off then.
Yes, Sunny. For the second straight day, Korea reported over 500 new COVID-19 cases. 538 infections were reported as of 12 a.m., and that includes 513 domestic cases and 25 cases from abroad. And that's a total of 136,467 up to date. Now, not a dramatic change in the daily tally in the past week, but if we compare the figure from last Monday, we are seeing an on-week drop from the 600s to the 500s. Officials, though, are worried about the COVID-19 reproduction rate that indicates how many people one person can transmit the virus to. On Sunday, that rate was at 1.04. So that's the first time that this figure has hit above 1 in over a month. And what's happened for the first time in 4 months is that the proportion of cases outside the metropolitan region has hit such a high proportion at 46.6%. If we take a closer look at our map now, we do see most cases, of course, still in the capital, Seoul and Gyeonggi-do province in the triple digits. But as you can see, many red zones here. Most places around the country have at least double-digit figures, even Jeju-do Island with 19 new infections, and Daegu here with 48 cases. Let's take a closer look at this city, as 40 of those 48 cases were linked to a cluster infection. The surge in the southeastern city is attributed to a cluster infection linked to a nightlife entertainment venue. Following the first contraction a little less than 2 weeks ago, chain transmissions occurred from visitors to workers and have, as of Sunday, resulted in a total of 158 infections, including around 60 foreigners. The city of Daegu has issued an administrative order under which nightlife venues like pubs and singing rooms cannot operate until May 30th.
I see. Meanwhile, overseas, So-ah, I hear a new variant is raising concerns in France.
Yes, Sunny, that's said to be a very rare variant, and at least 46 new cases were reported that are said to be this variant in the southwestern city of Bordeaux. So, over rising concerns, the vaccination drive in that city has been expanded so that as many adults as possible can be vaccinated as fast as possible in that region. Now, meanwhile, Israel, on the back of its successful vaccine drive, has announced on Sunday that it will lift all remaining social distancing measures on June 1st, and that will include the scrapping of vaccination verification systems. Last but not least, let's take a look at the numbers around the world. We've got India with a decline in recent daily infections, but still way over 200,000 new cases with a total of 26.7 million. Brazil has hit 16 million infections in the past day, and Russia has become the 6th country around the world to surpass the 5 million mark. And the total number of cases around the world stands at 167.5 million. Those are the updates I have for now, but I'll see you back after the briefing. Sunny?
All right, so I'll see you in a bit. Up next, we'll bring you the first installment of a special week-long series on the 5 arenas for universal action ahead of Seoul's hosting of the P4G summit late this month amid the pandemic. Now, the summit seeks global solidarity in response to climate change, and in today's segment, we focus on water.
Water is the prerequisite for all life on Earth, but many developing countries are facing a desperate shortage of this life-giving commodity.
The water sector is deeply affected by climate change. Overall, climate change is expected to reduce by 11 to 14% the global economic output by the year 2050, which amounts to as much as 23 trillion in reduced annual global economic output worldwide. Here at P4G, we also have a digital forward approach to the water sector, where we see the Internet of Things, big data, smartphones, apps, and digitization as key to the success of these models.
This local firm in the city of Daejeon in central Korea is a P4G partner specializing in smart water resource management. It uses the latest in IoT, AI, and cloud technology to tackle the world's water crisis.
지금 누수가 가상으로 발생됐다고 가정을 하고요. 일반적으로 사용자는 누수음을 요 수도 계량기나 밸브를 통해서 수집을 하게 됩니다. 스타트 버튼을 누르면은 이쪽으로 전달되는 누수음이 이 스마트폰 앱을 통해서 전달이 돼서요. 그래서 이쪽에서 음이 저장이 되고 이 저장된 음은 저희가 주파수라는 형식으로 분석을 하게 됩니다. 여기 보이시는 게 이제 주파수 차트가 되고요. 이렇게 함으로써 어느 곳에서 누군가가 음을 수집만 하면 쉽게 누수 여부를 판별할 수 있게 됩니다.
The company's solution to water loss to leakages is a simple new tool that can be used by ordinary people, not just trained specialists. Using a set of basic equipment, the user listens in for the sound of leaking water, which is then transmitted using a smartphone. The coordinates of the sound and other data are then uploaded on a server, which are analyzed by AI to pinpoint the exact location of the leak. This tool could allow people in developing countries to better manage their water resources and accurately detect any leaks with minimal training as long as they have access to the internet.
베트남만 해도 생산하는 물의 30에서 40% 정도를 지하로 낭비하는 수도 서비스 사업소들이 상당히 많습니다. 근데 만약에 베트남 같은 국가가 저희 기술을 이용해서 누수를 저감할 수 있다고 하면 그 저감한 양만큼의 신규 정수장 건설이 불필요해집니다. 그에 따라서 수자원도 확보를 할 수 있고요. 이런 개발도상국이 누수를 저감하는 기술을 확보하게 된다고 하면 그들이 얻을 수 있는 편익은 상당히 큽니다.
The world's swelling population and rapid urbanization has led to more demand for water than ever before. Unless we can address the problem of leakages by managing our water resources in a smarter and more efficient way, the world could face a very grim future. Carbon-neutral smart water management for climate resilience will be the main thematic session on the subject of water at the 2021 P4G Summit, serving as a platform for the sharing of smart water management policies and technology.
It's time now for the regular briefing on the COVID-19 situation here in Korea for this Monday. The social distancing guidelines have been extended for 3 more weeks until the 13th of June. The ban on social gatherings of 5 or more people also remains in place until then. And staying with COVID-19 prevention efforts, do limit your time at indoor venues that are crowded and poorly ventilated, as such spaces have been the source of rising cases in recent days. Authorities have thus reiterated calls for regular and proper ventilation of enclosed spaces to curb transmissions. Now, we are still waiting for the briefing to start, so let's take time now to remind ourselves about the possible physical discomforts that can be felt after COVID-19 vaccination. Now, the common side effects include pain at the injection site, fatigue, and headaches. Now, with regard to ways to minimize discomfort, here are a few natural remedies. Try applying a cold cloth or pack on the injection site, or try gently moving your vaccinated arm to stimulate blood flow to disperse the local area of inflammation. For those suffering from fatigue, get some rest, and for fever, drink plenty of water. If you need to take a painkiller, most doctors recommend Tylenol, as it is the least likely to interfere with your immune response. Thirdly, should your discomfort worsen, be sure to dial 119 for guidance. The briefing has yet to start, so let's now take a look at Korea's social distancing guidelines, which will be in place again until the 13th of June. Level 2 measures for the Greater Seoul area, as well as a few other regions that are witnessing spikes in their daily tally. The rest of the country faces level 1.5 social distancing. The ban on gatherings, as mentioned earlier, remains in place, with 5 or more people not permitted to meet for social purposes. Again, with the exceptions, of course, in a few places that have been recording fewer cases. Also, businesses including movie theatres, internet cafes, video game arcades, cram schools, amusement parks, as well as retail stores face no limit on operation hours. Meanwhile, restaurants, cafes, indoor gyms, singing rooms, party venues and indoor standing concert places can be open until 10 p.m. under level 2. Now, these venues, however, may see a 9 p.m. closing hour if the daily tally continues to climb. Also, nightlife entertainment establishments, including clubs and bars, have been shut. Movie theatres and performance halls have to leave one seat empty between patrons or parties. Sports stadiums under level 2 can host 10% of their capacity, while those under level 1.5 can host 30%. The attendance cap on weddings and funerals stands at 99 here in the metropolitan region and 499 in the rest of the nation. Places of worship are to abide by 20% capacity here in the metropolitan region for regular sermons and a 30% capacity elsewhere. Other religious activities such as Bible study, choir practice are to remain banned. This also includes meal sharing and lodging, of course. We're still waiting for the briefings to start, so now we'll take a look at today's figures, COVID-19 numbers that is, for Korea for this Monday. Now, as Soa mentioned earlier, we are looking at 538 new infections on this Monday, raising our global tally, our national tally that would be, to over 130,000. 3 people lost their lives today, raising our death toll to 1,934. Those in quarantine stands at a little above 8,000, while those fully recovered stands at more than 120,000. We're still waiting for the briefing to start. I understand the briefing is about to start. We'll come back to you afterwards.
Good afternoon. I am Commissioner of the KDCA, and let us now begin our regular briefing for May 24th, Monday. First of all, updates on the status on the COVID-19 vaccination. So far, those who have been inoculated stand at more than 3,792,000, which is about 7.4% of our population. And the number of people who have received both doses stand at over 1,746,000, which is about 3.4% of our total population. And also above the age of 80, we have about 1.5 million, and the vaccination rate stands at about 51%, the highest of all age groups. And starting from this week, we will be rolling out our vaccines for senior citizens. And also starting from the 27th of May, we will also begin the inoculation of the vaccinations to those between the age of 65 and 69 at the designated COVID-19 vaccine hospitals. And if you have made reservations, please visit the center for your vaccination. And we have about 56% vaccination rate, and we are still undergoing the vaccination booking. And if you go over at this deadline of June 3rd, please note that you will only get your vaccination as late as October, so please utilize these vaccination schedule. And also, we have about 13 million doses of vaccines set to arrive here in South Korea during the first half of this year. And we already have more than 8 million of them have arrived in South Korea. And we also have about 1.6 million more AstraZeneca vaccines to arrive in the near future. And as for Moderna vaccines, we also have been scheduled by 31st of May, 55,000 doses of the Moderna vaccines to arrive in Korea, which will be rolled out after June. And as for the efficacy rates of the vaccination, as for the senior citizens, we see that these efficacy rate is being once again confirmed. And we have analyzed these results. And if they had the first dose, the efficacy rate stands as high as 89.5%. And by age group, it differs. And about in the 60 age group of 60, we have about 86%, and about 93% for those over the age of 70 and about 98% for those in the 80s. And also, even after inoculation, if you are infected of COVID-19, we have 0 cases of fatalities reported of the COVID-19. So we say that there is a very high efficacy rate when it comes to preventing these fatalities. Please note that vaccination, especially for the senior citizens, is a way to protect your life going forward. And please do get vaccinated. And we also have the analysis of the second-hand infections within families after inoculation, and we have had about 42% efficacy rate. This means that if you have been infected with COVID-19, you will decrease the infection rate by about half. And also, as for cluster infections that we have been seeing lately at about 4 cluster infections at nursing hospitals, we have seen that over 80% and even reaching up to 90% efficacy rate have been reported at these facilities. And also, please note that vaccination can help your individual person's health and safety. However, it is also the most important means to protect the safety and the health of your loved ones as well. So if you are eligible recipient of the vaccination, please get your vaccines. And next, also, we have the adverse responses after the inoculation, and we have some analysis on the updates. We have had about 5.3 million doses of the vaccination that have been inoculated, and the adverse responses stand about 0.44%. And most of these cases, about 95.3%, were mild and common symptoms like muscle pain and headaches, and the rest were severe symptoms, and including anaphylaxis as well as death. And by gender, there were higher reports among females, and also we have about 2.5%, which was the highest among any age group between 18 to 29. And as for the age group of over the age of 70, we have about 0.19%. And also the Pfizer vaccines had about 0.18% of the report of these adverse responses. And we are seeing a gradual decline of these proportion of these adverse responses. And right now, we see that a total of 148 deaths have been reported after inoculation, and 60 were AstraZeneca vaccines, and 88 were Pfizer's vaccines. And also, we see that out of every 100,000 people, we have seen the similar portion of deaths, and we also have the similar numbers as for compared with other countries like the UK. And to this end, we are also providing our the public big data which have been compiled by our welfare sector, and we have been looking into these database to also enhance the safety of these vaccinations. And we are also matching these database sets of data, and we are also linking them with the national and public database set, and we are providing a more comprehensive and multifaceted analysis regarding the adverse responses. And utilizing our DUR system, we also provide our latest information on the vaccines. So we see that if there have been any reports of suspected cases of blood clots, we also provide the detailed measures. So we provided these information for about 4 weeks after the inoculation. And we also have some updates of the conclusion of the analysis done by the screening, the compensation panel screening. We have 13 cases, 13 rounds of screening, that is, and we have been looking at 150 cases of anaphylaxis, and out of the severe cases, 2 cases out of them, and about 37 cases out of the anaphylaxis cases, we have seen the correlation with the vaccines. And also we have seen there were cases there which have been not to see a clear response or the clear correlation between the vaccination and the adverse responses. And there were about 1 case after the rounds of the screening, and this the probe is still underway. And we also have been screening additional cases of deaths as well. And as of the 25 new deaths, 21 have been administered with the Pfizer vaccines and the AstraZeneca, 4 people. And the screening panel have looked at these cases, and 21 cases which have been deemed to have difficulties in the confirming the correlation with the vaccine. And as for the reasons of death, we have seen acute heart disease and also brain stroke, that is, and also there were also other illnesses due to respiratory diseases. And as for the 4 pending cases, they will be engaging in another round of test screening after the autopsy. And also as for these cases of these severe adverse responses, we have 16 Pfizer vaccines and 10 AstraZeneca vaccines. And we have been looking at the efficacy, the effects of these vaccinations. And we have seen that 24 cases have been deemed difficult to have the correlation with the vaccination. And as for the 1 pending case, they will be engaging in another round of screening. And we see that there were also diseases and illnesses that were related to the circulatory system. So they were the major causes of such severe adverse responses. And as for the COVID-19 updates, we have seen 586 average domestic cases for the past week, which has been a 0.7% on-week drop. We are also continuing to see cluster infections breaking out in the metropolitan area, as well as the Chungnam in regions as well. We have seen the foreign workers, the migrant workers cluster there, so we have seen an on-week increase. And with the expanded vaccination, we are seeing also a gradual and a slight decline in the number of fatality rate, as well as the number of people who have critical symptoms. And also here in South Korea, we are seeing daily tally hovering around the high 500s and centering around family clusters as well as nightlife entertainment venues. We are seeing cluster infections breaking out, and this calls for the importance of quarantine measures at our day-to-day venues. And also at the multi-use facilities as well as workplaces, we are seeing the cluster infections, especially centering around the facilities that employ the migrant workers. And in Chungcheong-do province, this is more particular. And the quarantine authorities would like to note, if you are visiting the multi-use facilities, you need to also take particular precautions. We need to carry out swift epidemiological investigation and contact tracing. And we also need to put in place a gathering ban on any religious facilities that have been the subject of such cluster infections. And also, in order to also increase the quarantine measures, we are also carrying out a regular preemptive testings, a massive preemptive testing of PCR. And at welfare facilities for the seniors, we are also carrying out the PCR massive testings as well. And at specific cities and provinces, we are also intensifying our monitoring. And as for the senior citizens aged over the age of 60, we are seeing the importance of the vaccination. As mentioned earlier, we see that a vaccination can prevent the spread of the virus, and you can also protect and prevent fatalities of COVID-19 by almost 100%. And you can also curb local infections and secondary infections to your loved ones as well. And until June 3rd, we are receiving the booking for the COVID-19 vaccination reservations for the senior citizens. Please utilize our KDCA call center or the local health community centers, as well as designated COVID-19 hospitals.
네. 그럼 지금부터 기자님들 질문에 답변 드리는 시간 갖겠습니다.
Right, that was Chong Young with Monday's afternoon briefing. So what did she have to say?
Let's start with the vaccination updates. Chung said that 7.4% of Korea's population, so almost 3.8 million, have received their first dose of COVID-19 vaccination, and 1.7 million, or 3.4%, their second dose. Also, the reservation rate for vaccinations for senior citizens stands at around 56%, with the KDCA commissioner calling on swift booking for the elderly. Meanwhile, in a recent assessment of post-inoculation deaths, there were 25 fatalities, but there was no correlation found between the deaths and the vaccination in 21 cases, while 4 cases still need more review. And last but not least, the total number of infections in the past week, the average stood at 586. That's a decline by 0.7%, so hardly any change there. And recently there were rises in cases linked to nightlife entertainment venues, foreign workers, as well as multi-use facilities.
All right. So as always, thank you very much for that.
Anytime.
미국의 선진 기술과 한국의 생산 역량을 결합한 한미 백신 글로벌 포괄적 파트너십을 구축하기로 했습니다.
We agreed to establish a comprehensive vaccine partnership to expand the manufacture of vaccines that have been approved safe and effective.
인류를 구할 백신의 공급이 부족한 상황에서 미국의 원천 기술과 한국의 생산 능력을 결합하여 전 세계적인 백신 공급을 획기적으로 늘림으로써 코로나 조기 종식에 기여하기 위한 목적입니다.
More than $25 billion in new investments from Samsung, Hyundai, SK, and LG. I understand the executives of those companies here. Would you please stand up? Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I think we'll do great work together.
The recent South Korea-US summit provided both countries with an opportunity to reaffirm their commitment to global well-being. And in today's studio session, we delve into the commitments made. For more on this, I have Professor Kim Se-wan from Imo Women's University. It's a pleasure to have you back, Professor Kim.
Thank you for having me today.
And I also have Dr. David Kwok from Soonchunhyang University Hospital. Good to see you again, Dr. Kwok.
Good afternoon.
Now, Dr. Kwok, perhaps the most visible difference between the Japan-US summit and the Korea-US summit was the presence of face masks last month and the absence of face masks last week. Now, given the latter reality, what can be assumed about the COVID-19 situation in the US?
Well, so I would like to mention two different factors regarding that. When Prime Minister Suga was visiting the US, he had been previously vaccinated his second dose only 10 days prior. And then as we all know by now, it requires at least 2 weeks of time after the final shot for us to assure that the person might have antibodies in the system. So I think that was one big factor why all the people in the White House was wearing heavy masks at the time. Also at the time, the numbers, the daily cases told in Japan was on the steep rise. And it is still kind of high, but at the time, even back then, was quite high compared to what we have now. We have maintained about 500 to 600 of daily cases so far, but in Japan, it's much more than that. So those two biggest differences were why both the White House and our government was able to take the mask off and have the discussion more freely.
Right. Dr. Kwok, Korea and the US also marked notable advances on the vaccine front, with Washington offering to inoculate more than 500,000 Korean soldiers, while American firms like Moderna and Novavax have sealed vaccine deals with their Korean counterparts. Now, keeping that in mind, how do these achievements look to reflect on Korea's vaccine supplies?
Well, obviously, the 550,000 vaccines that they are bound to come to Korea to supply the military personnel would obviously relieve us from the burden that we would have to sort sort of secure for ourselves as well. So at least 400, for the number of 550,000, we would be able to reallocate and be able to inoculate other civilians, non-military people. So in that sense, it's a very direct support, it's a very direct help that we would be getting as a country, but also in a sense that we are having of a memorandum of the understanding, the MOU, between these private sectors to carry on, start manufacturing for mRNA vaccine types such as the Moderna, will help boost the manufacturing capacity overall that'll supply globally. Not just in a sense that we may allocate it to our own country, but in a sense that we will be better able to supply the whole world with that much of a capacity and the amount of vaccines possible. So in that sense, if we have more supply of the vaccines, obviously we would eventually get some of that amount to our country as well. So in that sense, the fact that we were able to hit the strike a deal of having an MOU of a Korean company manufacturing the mRNA type of vaccines was, I think, a very great help towards providing vaccines for the whole world.
Right, and we'll get into that later on as well. But Professor Kim, first then, what do you suppose are the economic implications of the latest advances on the vaccine front between these two countries?
Well, medical bio industry will be another key industry of Korean economy in the near future, like memory chip industry is today. So the upgraded U.S.-Korea partnership in producing COVID vaccine will be another stepping stone in promoting domestic biomedical industry. Actually, Korean pharmaceutical firms are not so competitive in terms of developing high-tech biomedical products as of now. So they go through the strategy of contract manufacturing and biosimilars. So that means they, in the early stage of this strategy, they have to be something like a vaccine production hub in the global market. And it is also important to produce vaccines in a larger scale to cut the cost of the production. So these times, Samsung Biologics and Moderna's contract for producing vaccines in domestic facilities is a very successful step to promote domestic industry.
Right, a valid point, of course. Now, for a broader assessment of the recent summit between Presidents Moon and Biden, I have Annalisa Merelli live on the line. Welcome to the program, Annalisa.
Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm okay. Annalisa, what has been the general response to the talks between the two leaders over in the U.S.?
Well, I think, as you mentioned earlier, perhaps the most striking thing, at least seeing it from this side, is the absence of masks. And sort of, it felt like the first bi-party, like the first international summit where things seem back to normal to an extent. And I think it's, it's very telling that the discussions also were sort of like, about the vaccine, about producing more vaccines, about this idea of a vaccine swap between, Korea and the U.S. And sort of, it really felt like the conversation was moved beyond tackling the emergency and, towards what can be done, between the two countries to help each other and to help the rest of the world. And it's also one of the points that was touched is that, yes, there is, earlier on before the summit, there was a conversation about whether it was fair for the U.S. to give vaccines to Korea, given that, it is a wealthy country. But then at the same time, it was reminded during the summit that, Korea was very helpful to the U.S. about a year ago when, we had a shortage of, personal protective equipment and other products. So it really felt like a next step into the, tackling the emergency.
Right. Annalisa, Korea, as Dr. Kwak mentioned earlier, is now also poised to manufacture Moderna vaccines, following similar deals with AstraZeneca, Novavax, and Sputnik V. Do you suppose these deals, then, are tangible proof, perhaps, of Korea's vaccine manufacturing capacity?
I would say so. clearly Korea is known to have, a great capacity for biotechnology production and, biopharmacy production. And so having that applied to the vaccine really sort of like expands the capacity of providing effective vaccines across the world. And, considering that, there's a participation to COVAX and there's this sort of like global effort to speed up the vaccination internationally, it really seems like a key element to have such an important hub, with such a high capacity kind of turn its abilities towards the production of vaccines. And it seems also, I think, especially in the context of the conversations that have been about, patents and allowing the production of, U.S. developed vaccines in other countries. Like, again, it really sends the signal of a great cooperation.
Right. And Lisa, the Biden administration appears to have launched its own vaccine diplomacy in recent days. What more can you tell us about this shift in strategy with regard to vaccine supply for the globe?
Well, the administration had been sort of criticized not too long ago about being a bit weak in terms of its push for a bigger U.S. presence in the distribution and distribution of vaccines around the world. And I think, a lot of countries that sort of like try to pull their weight in terms of vaccine diplomacy. China definitely has shown, a lot of influence in several countries, both in Asia and in Africa and across the Middle East. The U.S. has sort of felt a little bit behind in that its primary focus for a long time has been vaccinating the population within the U.S. And now it seems like it's finally kind of making following up on the promise that was so key of the Biden administration of going back to the U.S.'s influence in the world and sort of like being, a key participant in cooperation project, a key participant in, in global development, in global health. And that was really one of the points, even during the campaign that the Biden administration has pointed forward. So it's really sort of, a big, like a step in line to what was the expectation for this government, if perhaps a little later than people would have wanted.
I see. All right, Annalise, thank you very much for making the time to join us live at this very late hour at your end.
You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure.
Right then, Dr. Kwok, SK Bioscience and Novavax have agreed to work together to produce a vaccine that fights the coronavirus, COVID-19 of course, and the flu, as well as another vaccine to fight coronavirus variants. When can you expect to see some tangible results?
Well, that's a very tough question, but as far as I know, I think there were studies that were done in animals, so we call it preclinical trials that were done already, and they showed very promising results. But it also means that there are many, many steps to go before it actually hits the real market out. As we have seen before with other types of vaccines, it took at least 6 months to a year through going through all the clinical trials, phase 1, 2, and 3 altogether, before they were actually processed through the reviews by the different governmental agencies. So at this moment, we're not even into clinical trial 1 yet. So that'll take some time, I believe. But also a huge factor is that we're still not in the winter season yet, meaning the flu season hasn't started, and that's about 4 to 5 months away. Hopefully, if something goes quicker, if the companies are able to recruit as many people for both, not both, but all the clinical trials and go through all the review process. And I'll be hoping and having my fingers crossed that it'll hit the market before the end of the year. But that's only my speculation, and we'll have to see what exactly happens with the real world situation.
Right. Dr. Kwok, pundits, including Professor Kim, have been highlighting the importance of vaccine manufacturing capacity amid forecasts that COVID-19 could become an endemic. Now, keeping in mind the recent accords with the U.S., is Korea on the right path?
I would think so, because not just in the sense that we're helping for ourselves, we are sort of providing for the whole world so that the more people would be able to be inoculated with the very advanced vaccine type. But let's remind ourselves this MOU that we have with the American companies is that they're not transferring to us the knowledge and the technology to build up or establish these types of vaccines. We're only manufacturing these massive amounts for them. But we would have to sort of find a way so that this will eventually also be helpful to us in a sense that we will be able to come up with our own vaccines in the future as well.
Right, to serve as a foothold then.
That's true.
Professor Kim, let's now turn to the economic accords. Korea's Samsung, LG, SK and Hyundai, as seen in the video, have agreed to invest some 44 trillion won in the US, and this was received with much gratitude by US President Joe Biden. What, in your opinion, is the significance of such an investment?
Korean companies' huge investment, 44 trillion won or over 35 billion US dollars, was a crucial leverage in bringing out the outcomes over to summit's meeting this time. Foreign investment is very important in every country, including Korea, but it is particularly important to the United States because their manufacturing sector is declining and job is also declining together. So I would say that the only economic policy succeeded by President Biden from President Trump is attracting more foreign companies. But if we take a look at this huge investment of Korean companies to US, in different angle, that means Korean companies and Korean economy is participating in US leading global production chain in key high-tech parts like semiconductors and batteries. So that means, that makes actually Chinese government very uncomfortable with that closer relationship between the two countries. So I think there should be careful diplomatic and economic attention to avoid possible damages in the middle of competition between Washington and Beijing in gaining their own production environment in high-tech products.
Right, Professor Kim, and because you mentioned it now, I'm going to ask you, given such tensions between Beijing and Washington, how should Korea seek to navigate its respective economic ties with these two countries?
Well, that is really a tough question, but after having US sanctions on Huawei and other high-tech Chinese companies, Beijing's strategy to overcome that difficult situation is very simple. Construct their own production chain in key industries and key products. That would be a possible scenario if they can invite high-tech production technology countries like Japan, Germany, and South Korea. But as of now, the prospects is pretty much negative because these major countries are more related to US economy in both of economic way and diplomatic way. So there could be, I think, economic sanctions from China as we experience over the deployment of THAAD in Korean Peninsula. So there should be something, strategy that disconnect the relationship between economic relation and political relation in the whole relation with China for Korean government.
I see, a balance then.
Right.
Dr. Kwak, what can you tell us about the importance of inoculation to ensure broad exchanges on the business and diplomatic fronts amid the pandemic?
Well, so back in March, I think the government started to take a plan that for people who are being either deployed to foreign countries or visiting frequently to foreign countries, to have priority in the inoculation plan, even if they don't belong to certain age groups or certain occupation groups for the inoculation. So, and also for people, let's say, for example, people who are planning to go to Olympics, those people who would be staying less than 3 months in a foreign country, they would also be prioritized in being given the inoculation. And I think that's being undertaken already. So for people who are serving public services, public purpose visits to foreign countries are now being given and being already given inoculation before their departure to foreign countries. There are also different other plans that the Korean government is also taking apart from this, is that there are, for frequent flyers, people who are visiting frequently to other countries, countries for, whether that be for even public purposes or even non-public purposes that still serves local community, they have some sort of exemption from quarantine measures, both in both countries, that whether they, how frequently they visit each countries, they would be exempted from, let's say, being tested every each time and also going into quarantine for 2 weeks every each time. So to more make it easier for them to, I guess, do the business for the public service.
Right, and for overseas travel, you would of course advise 2 weeks after your second inoculation.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, Dr. Kwok, as always, thank you very much for your thoughts. And Professor Kim, thank you very much for your insights today.
Thank you very much.
Right, that brings us to the end of this edition of COVID-19. Do seek to abide by prevention guidelines amid sporadic cluster infections across the nation. Thank you for watching.